Joseph Molloy, an actor, faces 2 charges under the Theft Act of obtaining and attempting to obtain money by deception. This arises from his alleged impersonation of Robert Randell, producer of the popular twice-weekly television serial Union Square.
Joyce Farrington.
The trial, presided over by Mr. Justice Hastings, has already begun.
What religion are you?
Sylvia.
And take the book in your right hand and repeat the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mrs. Farrington, what is your full name?
Joyce Farrington.
And where do you live?
Church Inn, Brompton Abbot.
Mrs. Farrington, it's important that all your evidence should be heard both by His Lordship and by the members of the jury, so might I ask you to speak a little louder? Just a little. Thank you. Now, Mrs. Farrington, is it right that you're the manageress of the Church Inn?
No, I'm the tenant. The tenancy passed to me on the death of my husband.
I see. When was that?
It was about a year. Well, no, 13 months to be exact.
Thank you. Do you have any children, any family to help you with the running of the inn?
No.
Now, Mrs. Farrington, would you tell His Lordship and the members of the jury what happened on the evening of Friday, April the 18th this year? In your own words, and take your time.
Oh, very well, yes. Well, I was serving in the lounge bar. It was quite busy. We're a weekend house. We do most of our trade on Friday evenings and over the weekend. Being on the edge of town and having the caravan site nearby...
Mrs. Farrington, I don't want to stop you, and I did ask you to take your own time, but perhaps I haven't made myself totally clear. I was referring to the specific events of that evening which lead to us being here today.
Oh, yes, I see. Very well, yes. Well, let me... Oh, about 7:45, a gentleman came into the bar, and I served him with a large whisky. Quite on his own, he was. I didn't see him talk to anyone. He just bought another drink every now and again. And then, to be about 20 to 11... Oh, we don't close until 11 on Fridays. It's about 22. He came over for a last drink, and then he asked if he could have a word with me.
Before we go on, Mrs. Farrington, subsequently, on Saturday the 17th of May, did you attend an identification parade at Fulchester Central Police Station?
Yes, I did.
And did you there see the man who had spoken to you on the evening of April the 18th?
Yes, I did.
Is that man in court?
Oh, yes, he is.
Would you point him out to us, please?
That's him.
The accused?
Yes.
Thank you. Please go on, Mrs. Farrington. He asked if he might speak to you.
Oh, yes. Yes, well, I told him then that I would be rather busy whilst we were still open, and could he wait until we closed?
And?
He said he could.
Please continue.
Oh, yes, well, he did wait. And then, well, by the time I got the staff home, why, I have a minibus called for them every evening. It's very difficult with staff these days. So by the time they'd gone, it would be about 11:30. And rather than talk in an empty bar, I invited him through into my private lounge. We had a cup of coffee while we talked. He told me his name was Robert Randell and that he was a television producer. And then he said that he'd been looking around the country for someone to...
Mrs. Farrington, now, did the accused tell you the name of the program that he produced?
Oh, no, he didn't need to, sir. I knew. It was called Union Square, and it was a serial. You see, working the hours I do, I don't get to watch much television, but with this being on in midweek and in the early hours of the evening, it's one of the few I do get to see.
So you immediately associated the name Robert Randell with this particular program?
Yes, sir, I did.
Yes, I see. Please go on.
Oh, yes, well, then he told me that there was a public house in his program, which of course I knew, and that the actor and actress who were playing the landlord and landlady wanted to leave, and he was looking around for someone to take their place. Well, and then he said he was interested in me for the part. Well, I told him I wasn't an actress, but he said it didn't matter. You see, he said, well, they'd had so many letters of complaint about the way that they worked the bar and, you know, the drawing pints of beer and things, well, that he decided to look around for real licensees and make them into actors. He was very plausible.
Did you do any further business with him?
Oh, well, yes, I suppose you could call it business in a way. He said that he wouldn't be going back until after the weekend, and he realised that with the banks being closed that day, he wouldn't be able to get any money. He asked if I could cash a cheque for him.
And did you?
No. I said he needn't bother with a cheque. I said I'd lend him some money. He said he'd be going to draw £40 out, so I lent him that. I said he could give me the money back when he saw me next.
And you only lent him that £40 because you believed him to be Robert Randell, the television producer.
Really, my lord?
Yes, I do agree, Mr. Lowry. Mr. Boyce, I really don't think you should lead on these matters, no matter how obvious they may seem.
Perhaps I should make it clear, my lord, that my client has an alibi for the charge to which this evidence relates, and accordingly, whoever borrowed the money from this lady, it certainly wasn't him. My objection is academic in a sense, but I'm also anxious that my learned friend should not get into the habit of leading as witnesses.
You may leave it to me, Mr. Lowry, to ensure that Mr. Boyce does not develop any such bad habits.
No.
Mr. Boyce.
Mrs. Farrington, would you have lent that money to the accused if you had been aware that he was not Robert Randell, the television producer?
Oh, no, of course I wouldn't, but I had no idea that he wasn't who he said he was.
Now, you told us, Mrs. Farrington, that you said he could give you the money back when you next saw him. What did he say to that?
Oh, he said that would be fine with him. He said that he'd be arranging for me to go to London the middle of the following week, probably Wednesday or Thursday, and if I didn't mind waiting, he'd give it to me then.
And have you had the money back, Mrs. Farrington?
No.
Well, what happened then, after the accused left you?
Well, I waited until the following Thursday, and then when I hadn't heard anything, I thought I'd better make some enquiries.
Now, what did you do as a result of those inquiries?
I contacted the police and I told them all about it.
And what happened next?
Well, nothing, and until I was asked to go to Fulchester to this identity parade, to look at these men.
And you have no doubt that the man in the dock is the same man that visited you that evening, who told you a story you've since discovered to be totally without foundation, and who took from you the sum of £40.
Oh, yes, it's the same man.
Thank you, Mrs. Farrington.
May I ask how old you are, Mrs. Farrington?
I'm 43.
I don't know if you're familiar with the works of George Bernard Shaw, Mrs. Farrington. He had it that every man over 40 is a scoundrel. Well, I'm sure he didn't mean to apply it to the ladies. At least one hopes not. Now, Mrs. Farrington, you've told my learned friend that because you heard nothing further from this man who passed himself off as a television producer, you made some inquiries. Now, do you mean by that you got in touch with Mr. Robert Randell, the real television producer?
Yes, I did.
By telephone?
Yes.
And did he seem surprised to hear your story?
Yes, he did seem a bit surprised.
He didn't say it had happened before?
No.
I see. And he suggested that you contact your local police?
Yes.
Which you did?
Yes.
Yes. Mrs. Farrington, will you take one more look at the man sitting in the dock? And remembering that you are on oath, can you say that this is the man who visited you on the evening of April 18th?
Yes.
Did you say no, Mrs. Farrington?
No, I said, yes, it is the same man.
Forgive me, I could have understood your having doubts. You see, the gentleman who's in the dock bears very little resemblance to the man that you described to the police, does he? Do you remember the description that you gave to the police?
No, not exactly.
Ah, well, you said, didn't you, when you first reported the matter? He was about 5 feet 11 inches tall, in his late 30s, with long black wavy hair curling over his ears, didn't you?
Yes.
Well, how is it now that you describe you say that my client is the man who deceived you? Look at him, Mrs. Farrington. Would you stand up, please, Mr. Molloy? Now, he is 5 feet 8 inches tall. He is 52 years old. With long, black, wavy hair curling over his ears, Mrs. Farrington.
Well, I'm not very good at describing people.
Aren't you? I suggest you're perfectly able to describe people. It's only when you came to identify my client that you defied your own recollection and your own description. Now, you also told my learned friend, and again I quote, that with the banks being closed that day, he wouldn't be able to get any money. Now, what exactly do you mean by that, with the banks being closed that day? We're talking about a Friday, aren't we?
Well, the banks close at 3:30.
Yes, I know they do, Mrs. Farrington. That's not what you said. You said the banks being closed that day. Now, banks are closed on a Saturday. They're open on a Friday. Was it perhaps on a Saturday that this conversation took place? Did the man come on a Friday and not leave till a Saturday? And it was a Saturday that we're talking about.
Yes.
He stayed the night.
Yes.
He took a room for the night?
No.
Don't worry, Mrs. Farrington. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Just tell me one thing. Did you spend any length of time in this man's company before going to bed that night?
Yes.
And so it could be said that you reached some degree of intimacy with this man during that time.
In a way, yes.
In a way, yes. And the man who spent the night under your roof was in his late 30s, 5 feet 11 inches tall, with long black hair, waving hair curling over his ears.
No, that was the man.
Mrs. Farrington, what did Mr. Randell say to you when he telephoned you on the Friday evening? I'm talking now about a month later.
No, nothing much. He just called to tell me that they'd arrested a man, and he thought I'd like to know.
He thought you'd like to know. Did he not ask you to do something for him, Mrs. Farrington?
No.
Did he not, Mrs. Farrington? Did he not say that you would be called upon to identify a man, and that he, Mr. Randell, would be most grateful for your help in getting rid of that man? Did he not ask you to identify the accused, whether or not he was the guilty party? And did you not do exactly as you were asked? That is, identify my client, even though he was not your deceiver.
But he was.
Look at him, Mrs. Farrington! Look at him! In his late 30s, 5 feet 11, long black wavy hair curling over his
I
ears.
told you, I'm not very good at describing people.
You're not very good at anything, Mrs. Farrington. Not even lying. Now, Mrs. Farrington, some weeks after you had falsely identified the accused, Mr. Randell gave you a diamond ring, didn't he?
Yes, but it was
Yes,
just
thank you, Mrs. Farrington. That's all.
Was this an expensive ring that Mr. Randell bought for you?
Oh, no. I mean, I don't know how much it cost, but no, it wasn't an expensive one.
And did he say why he bought it for you?
Well, yes, it was to recompense me for my trouble, for what I'd lost, the £40.
Yes, I see, thank you. Now, Mrs. Farrington, let's get this quite clear and in the open. Did you sleep with the man who stayed with you that night in April? Or did you?
Yes.
Are you in the habit of sleeping with strange men?
No.
Or for that matter, with any men since your husband
No.
died? So, you had the very best possibility for observing that man during the night and the following day, and every reason for having a clear recollection of him. Is that man the accused?
Yes.
Why, then, did you describe him as you first did?
I don't know.
All right, Mrs. Farrington. I think we can understand. Thank you. Mr. Randell, on the 18th of April last at the Church Inn, Brompton Abbot, and on the 16th of May at the Feathers Hotel, Fulchester, a man introduced himself to the respective landladies as Robert Randell. Was that man you?
No.
On neither occasion?
On neither occasion.
Mr. Randell, have you ever met the accused?
I don't recall ever meeting him, my lord, but I may have seen him before.
Oh, where?
In the studios, possibly. You see, the police told me that the accused was an actor and asked if he'd ever been on my program. I had it checked out, and indeed he had.
So you would not have known if he'd worked on the program?
Not necessarily.
But you have not met him?
No, I have never met him.
That is a lie, sir. It's a lie.
Molloy, if there are any more interruptions of this nature, you will be taken down to the cells to cool off. Mr. Boyce.
Mr. Randell, would it be difficult for an artist with that kind of association with your company to become au fait with the workings of your program?
No, we're a democratic setup. We don't erect any social barriers. Naturally, producers, casting directors, they have to be careful. They don't want to be accused of favouring any particular artist or agent, but general conversation in the bar, the canteen, that goes on all the time.
And your own personal idiosyncrasies, they would also be on general show?
Yes, I suppose so. We're not looking over our shoulder all the time to see if we're being watched. Maybe we should. Maybe that's why the entertainment profession figures so largely in the gossip columns.
Yes, thank you. Now, Mr. Randell, I want you to assist by explaining how a certain article, together with a photograph of yourself, came to be published in a newspaper about the beginning of May.
Yes, about during the previous 5 months, I'd received 3 telephone calls which led me to believe that I was being impersonated.
So eventually you got in touch with the police?
Yes.
Did you visit your local police station?
No, the detective inspector came to my office. He specifically asked if he might. He also asked if he could look around the studios.
You'll find that even people with interesting occupations still find a certain glamour attached to television.
Would appear so, yes.
After you'd been seen by the police, what further steps did you take?
Well, it occurred to me that the impersonator seemed to favour public houses, so I contacted the Morning Advertiser.
Ah, yes, the Morning Advertiser.
Mr. Boyce, am I right in thinking that the Morning Advertiser is the daily newspaper of the licensed fiddling trade?
You are indeed, my lord. I believe it has a wide circulation amongst the public houses of the country, and the allied trades, of course.
Yes, I thought so. I just didn't want the jury to confuse it with the Morning Star.
Indeed, my lord. Now, Mr. Randell, you contacted the Morning Advertiser.
Yes.
What happened as a result?
Well, they agreed to publish my story and a photograph so that if anybody went into a pub pretending to be me, the licensee would have a photograph to check it against.
Why was it necessary to publish a photograph of yourself? Are you not a public figure?
Not in the same way that the regular members of my cast are public figures. They can hardly go anywhere in Great Britain without being recognized, but outside my normal circle of friends, few people know me by sight.
But you are known to a vast number of people by reputation. You do get a good deal of publicity.
Yes, and I don't object to that. I regard publicity as an essential ingredient in our business.
I take it, Mr. Randell, though, that this article and the photograph were not done as a publicity stunt.
Oh, decidedly not, Your Honour. I'd given the matter a great deal of thought. And it occurred to me that if this man was passing himself off as me over a great deal of country, well, it could not only harm me, but also the programme.
Mr. Randell, what harm do you consider it could have done to you personally?
Well, that's rather difficult to assess. I like to think we all possess a certain amount of integrity. Take drink, for instance. I like a few drinks, but I don't like the thought of being seen drunk in public. Well, for all I knew, he could be going around saying he was me and being stoned out of his mind. We're subject to a great deal of gossip. I could be acquiring a shady reputation by proxy.
Most unsatisfactory method.
Yeah, not only that. From what I've heard, he was very successful with the ladies. Well, that coupled with... Well, it appears he was having a far more interesting life pretending to be me than I was having being me.
My lord, listen to with a great deal of patience this very poignant account of this witness's jeopardy, but we are gathered here to hear evidence relating to charges brought under the Theft Act, not to absorb some rambling account of this witness's anxieties.
Yes, I don't think it's necessary to go into all this at quite such length, Mr. Boyce.
Very well, my lord. Mr. Randell, to return to the Morning Advertiser, did the photograph subsequently appear?
Yes, it did. They were most helpful. The photograph and my article appeared on May the 15th.
Which was a Thursday?
Which was a Thursday, yes.
And did you have to wait long for a reaction?
Not long at all. As it happened, a man was detained on the following day, on the Friday.
Thank you, Mr. Randell. Now, if you'll perform one last service for us, could the witness be shown Exhibit 1, please? Do you recognize that photograph, Mr. Randell?
Yes, this is a still from Union Square. That was to mark our 500th episode. We wanted a group photograph, and that was it.
Are copies available to the public?
Not of that one. No, there are photographs available on request, but not that one. There'd be a few copies around the office, nothing more.
Locked away?
Not necessarily, no.
And the office itself, is that kept locked?
Some of the evenings, yes. I'm afraid we're rather lax about that. Confidential papers, that sort of thing, they're locked away in filing cabinets, of course, but the office remains open most of the time.
Thank you, Mr. Randell.
Oh, Mr. Randall, this serial of yours, Union Square, you say it's been going on for several years?
7.
7. And you have been producing it for 4, and directing it before that, since the beginning?
Yes, since the very beginning. I directed the first 2 episodes.
I see, so that gives you almost a proprietorial interest.
I'm a salaried employee of the company.
Ah, well, men must work and companies must salt away the profits, eh, Mr. Randall?
I have no complaints.
Good. 7 years. I wish I could say that I'd enjoyed your program, Mr. Randall, but unfortunately I don't think I've ever seen it, not consciously at least. It may be a professional bias, but I prefer fact to fiction.
Not surprised to hear you say that. Well, you know, judging from the number of people who say the same thing, it's a constant source of wonder to me why Panorama isn't top of the ratings every week.
And to me, Mr. Randall. And to me. Perhaps your system of audience measurement is at fault. Now, Mr. Randall.
Randell.
What was that?
My name is pronounced Randell.
Oh. I'm sorry, Mr. Randell. Now, Mr. Randell, you have told my learned friend that you've never met the accused. The truth is it not, that he came into your office on the 15th of February this year. You talked for about a quarter of an hour, and before he left, you gave him a photograph of the cast of your program.
I've already said I never met him.
That is a lie, sir.
I have never met the accused. I repeat, I've never met the accused.
Clear only a few moments ago that if there were any further interruptions, you would go down to the cells. Take him down. We shall adjourn until it's cooled off. All stand.
The jury is composed of members of the general public. The case of the Queen against Molloy will be continued tomorrow in the Crown Court. Joseph Molloy, an actor, faces 2 charges under the Theft Act. It's alleged that he committed the offences whilst passing himself off as Robert Randell, the producer of a nationally known television serial. Mrs. Joyce Farrington, the licensee of an inn, has given evidence that Molloy obtained £40 from her as a result of the deception. Following a series of interruptions by the defendant during the cross-examination of Mr. Randell, Mr. Justice Hastings adjourned the trial. Mr. Randell's cross-examination by Molloy's counsel has now been resumed.
As we were saying before we were so rudely, but perhaps understandably interrupted, Mr. Randell, you say you have never met the accused?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
All right, well, we'll leave that point for the moment. Now, I'd like to come on to the subject of the ratings of your program. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a list of the most popular programs of each week, is it not?
Well, you could put it like that. Actually, it's a list of the programs with the largest audiences.
Ah, well, I must admit I was using the word popular more in its relationship to numbers than appreciation.
Yes, I gathered that, but I don't discriminate in the same way. You see, we whose business it is to study these things tend to believe that the average viewer is no fool. If he doesn't like a program, he's perfectly capable of turning it off. Programs with large audiences are programs that are largely enjoyed.
And where does your program stand in the ratings at the moment?
At the last issue, it was second and fourth.
It was the second and fourth most popular program of that week.
That's correct.
And this pleases you?
Well, of course it does. I know there are people both inside and outside television who view popularity with some suspicion, but I'm not one of them. I like to believe that the ratings are a measure of success. You see, I'm in the entertainment business. It's a strange theatre manager that doesn't like to fill his theatre.
I don't doubt that, Mr. Randell, but let us not concern ourselves with strange theatre managers. Let us rather concern ourselves with perfectly standard television producers. Now then, on the evening of Friday, May the 16th last, the accused was detained by the Fulchester police as a result of a telephone call made to them by a Mrs. Bedelia Conroy of the Feathers Hotel of that town. Now, were you aware of this at the time?
No, I was told about it later.
How much later?
On the Monday, after the detective inspector told me.
No, Mr. Randell, I'm afraid we're at cross purposes. I mean, when were you first told?
I don't follow.
Then I'll try to lead you more gently. On the evening of Friday, May the 16th, you were in the bar at your studios, as is your practice, following the taping of one of your shows. Is that correct?
Probably. I can't recall the night in question, but I'm usually there at that time.
Oh, you can't recall the night in question. Then let me refresh your memory. At approximately 8:10, you received a telephone call in the bar. I can tell you who else was present when you took the call.
I'm sure you can.
Well, think then, Mr. Randell. Friday, May the 16th. A telephone call.
Ah, that was the day after my photograph appeared in the Morning Advertiser. Yes, I did receive a call. It was from a lady. She'd seen my photograph and hoped we'd catch the man. I didn't pursue the matter. It was fairly unintelligible. I merely thanked her and rang off.
And you understood no more than that? That this woman had seen your photograph and expressed hopes that the man would be caught?
Yes.
Are you saying that you did not also learn that the caller was Mrs. Bedelia Conroy, on whose premises the accused had been detained by the police 3 minutes earlier?
Now, when I come to think of it, I did hear something to that effect. Yes, that Mrs. Conroy had telephoned, but I didn't know it was Mrs. Conroy at the time.
I see. So you're saying that even if she did describe the accused to you, you did not hear?
Well, I've told you I heard very little. I'm constantly getting garbled telephone calls which make very little sense. My only excuse is to hang up.
Oh, really? That does seem a rather cavalier attitude to adopt your loyal viewers, Mr. Randell. From what you told my learned friend, you guard your program's reputation most jealously.
You get all sorts of cranks on the telephone. You can't humour them all.
I see. Now then, after you'd hung up on Mrs. Conroy, you immediately asked the waitress for some change, didn't you, in 10-pence pieces for the telephone, which would suggest a long-distance call. To Mrs. Joyce Farrington at Brompton Abbot, perhaps?
Oh, no, I never phoned Mrs. Farrington.
Really? Well, according to her, you did. You rang her and you told her that a man had been detained on the Friday.
Oh, no, she must be mistaken. It was on the Monday I phoned her, after the police had told me.
No, I would suggest to you that you are mistaken, Mr. Randell. I would suggest that after being telephoned by Mrs. Conroy and failing to hear what she had to say, you rang Mrs. Farrington 2 minutes later that Friday evening and you told her what you had failed to hear. Namely, a description of the accused which Mrs. Conroy had given to you.
Why on earth would I do that?
Why, Mr. Randell? Well, did you not wish Mrs. Farrington to identify the accused? Did you not wish to ensure that this case came to court?
Well, in God's name, why?
Well, the fact is it not, Mr. Randell, that you are on a freelance contract with your company and that contract expires next month?
It's renewed automatically every year.
Yes, but in May of this year, you appreciated that things might be different, did you not? Times are hard. And in May of this year, your program was not second and fourth in the ratings. It was 17th and 20th, and it was slipping every week, wasn't it?
There'd been a bad patch, yes.
A bad patch, a very bad patch, getting worse. You needed publicity. But how to get it? I mean, the detention and later release of a suspect would hardly be sufficient to excite the press. But the detention and later trial of a suspect certainly would, and it did. You and your program have rarely been out of the newspapers since.
My lord, I
Look,
have never
Mr.
at any
Randell,
time...
I am not accusing you of contempt. I'm sure that everything you said to the press was perfectly proper. Mr. Randell, tell me, Why did you buy Mrs. Farrington a diamond ring for her help in this matter?
I did not buy Mrs. Farrington anything for her help.
Very well, then, let me shorten the question. Why did you buy Mrs. Farrington a diamond ring? You're not going to deny that you bought her a ring, are you?
No, I merely quarrel with the motive you ascribe to me. Mrs. Farrington had been the loser in a particularly sordid episode which, whether I like it or not, involved me. I merely tried to recompense her in some way. She'd been through a particularly degrading ordeal.
Yes, how right you are. To agree to subvert the course of justice by a false identification is indeed degrading.
Why didn't you mention this business of the ring before?
I didn't consider it relevant. I realize in these enlightened times that the victim invariably receives less consideration than the criminal. I merely try to make some small amends.
I understand.
Perhaps I overdid my responsibilities.
I understand that, Mr. Randell. One final point. Did you speak to Mrs. Conroy on the night the accused was detained at her hotel? That is to say, on the evening of Friday, May the 16th.
Well, it's been pointed out to me that I may have done, but if I did, I was certainly unaware of it at the time.
Did you speak to Mrs. Farrington that evening?
No, I didn't.
When did you first hear that a man had been taken into custody?
On the Monday, from Detective Inspector Hemmings.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Randall. Do you have any further questions, my lord?
No, you may leave the witness box, Mr. Randell.
I call Mrs. Bedelia Conroy. Mrs. Conroy, what is your full name?
Bedelia Ann Conroy.
Where do you live?
The Feathers Hotel at Fulchester.
Your husband is the licensee?
Yes.
Now, Mrs. Conroy, can I take you back to Thursday, May the 15th this year, and to an article which appeared in the Morning Advertiser? You do subscribe to that journal?
Oh, yes, we've always had it.
Well, on that day, there appeared an article of particular interest. Could you tell us about that article?
Well, it just said that if someone came into your public house and he said his name was Robert Randell, that we had to ring the police.
Just that, Mrs. Conroy. Supposing the real Robert Randell came into your hotel.
Ah, well, it wouldn't have been the real one, because there was a photograph in the paper. Well, it could have been, but we'd have known, because he'd look the same as his picture. It was only if he didn't look the same as his picture that we had to ring the police.
I see. There was a photograph of the real Robert Randell in the paper. Now, can you see Mr. Randell in court?
Oh, yes. He's there.
What happened the following day?
In the evening, do you mean?
Yes, in the evening.
Well, it was my husband's night off. He goes to Legion Fridays. And it was about 7, perhaps 15:15. You know, I can't be right at the minute. And this man comes in and buys a drink, and he starts talking. Well, he was a stranger to the neighbourhood, he told me. And before I knew where I was, he'd asked me to change a cheque. Well, I don't usually, and I told him. So then he said, well, if it helps, my name is Robert Randell, the producer of Union Square. Well, it clicked. I mean, it would, wouldn't it? It was on it day before.
Did he produce a chequebook, Mrs. Conroy?
Yeah, he did.
And did you happen to notice which bank issued the chequebook?
It was the Midlands, same as mine and Mr. Conroy's.
So what did you do next, Mrs. Conroy?
Well, I thought to myself, now, what should I do? So I said, excuse me, and I went through into the back, and I got the paper. It didn't look a bit like the photograph, so I rang the police.
And then what happened?
Well, I was a bit frightened, you know, Mr. Conroy not being at home. So I stayed in the back till I heard the police car arrive, and then I went through into the bar, and there were these 2 young policemen talking to him. Well, they asked me about it, and then they just took him away.
Is that man in court, Mrs. Conroy?
Oh, yeah, that's him.
Now, did anything else of importance happen that evening?
Yeah, well, about half an hour after they'd taken him away, the telephone rang, and it was a woman asking for Mr. Randell. Well, I told her that he'd left, and click, she'd gone. I did tell the police about it.
Did you at any time ring the real Mr. Randell?
Yeah, well, just after they'd taken him away, I thought I'd ring him up and let him know, because it's a favourite programme of mine is Union Square. I did write to them about 2 years ago, asking for some photographs. Sent them straight back with a very nice letter. So I had the phone number. Well, the noise on the end of that line, I had to shout. And, I just said that we'd caught the man, and I did hear him say, thank you.
And I'll say it too. Thank you, Mrs. Conroy.
Mrs. Conroy, now tell me, can you remember the accused's exact words after he broached the subject of the cheque? Now, you said that you don't normally cash cheques, and then he said...
Yeah, well, he said, well, if it helps, I'm in television. And then he said something right funny. He said, not that it cuts much ice with some people. Yeah, that's what he said. Not that it cuts much ice with some people, but my name is Robert Randell, the producer.
Now, think most carefully, Mrs. Conroy. Are you absolutely sure that he said the producer?
Oh, yes.
Look, let me put something to you, Mrs. Conroy. Suppose someone were to come into your bar and introduce himself with the words, I'm Robert Randell, I'm in television. You'd automatically assume that he was the producer of Union Square, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Now, bearing that in mind, are you still absolutely sure that he said the producer?
Oh, yes.
Definitely?
Definitely.
When you telephoned Mr. Randell that Friday night, Mrs. Conroy, did you describe the accused to him?
I can't remember. I don't think so.
You can't remember?
Well, it is a long time since.
Oh, yes, it is, but that doesn't seem to have prevented you remembering a great deal about that evening, including the accused's exact words. May I suggest to you that you did describe him, and described him most accurately?
Oh, no, I can't have done that, because I only saw him for a minute.
Oh, you mean after he said that he was Robert Randell, you left it?
Yeah, I did tell the other gentleman.
So you don't think that you could have given a good enough description for, say, someone to have picked him out of a crowd of people?
Oh, no.
Was your bar empty that night, Mrs. Conroy?
Oh, we're quite busy Fridays. It's pay night, you see.
So it can't have been very pleasant for you to have the police walk into your crowded bar.
No, I did think about that. I mean, most of them are quite nice to me, but they do tend to frighten folk off.
Well, I'm sure they don't mean to, Mrs. Conroy. Now then, you told the other gentleman that you stayed in your sitting room until you heard the police car, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And when you came back into the bar, the police were talking to the accused?
Yeah, yeah.
Why?
Pardon?
Why were they talking to the accused? Why weren't they waiting for you to come through and identify him?
Oh, well, I think I did tell them what he looked like, over the telephone.
In sufficient detail for them to be able to pick him out of a crowd?
I must have done, mustn't I?
Yes. You must indeed, Mrs. Conroy.
And were you present at that identification parade?
Yes, sir, I was. It took place at Forchester Central Police Station on the morning of Saturday, May 17th last.
And will you tell the court who was picked out by Mrs. Joyce Farrington of the Church Inn, Brompton Abbot?
The accused, sir.
Could the witness be shown Exhibit 1, please? Do you recognise that photograph, Sergeant?
Yes, sir. It's the photograph I found in the briefcase of the accused when he was searched at Forchester Central Police Station on the evening of Friday, May 16th.
And do you know what that photograph is?
I understand it's a picture of the actors and actresses in a television programme, sir. Union Square.
Thank you, Sergeant. It has been identified as such.
Are you saying that the accused made no statement whatsoever?
Yes, sir.
You mean to...
I'm telling the court that the accused made no statement whatsoever, sir.
Did he not say to you, you're going to look very silly when the truth comes out?
I have no note of that, sir.
But he may have done.
No, sir. I would have had a note if he had.
So you say, officer. So you say.
Does your lordship have any more questions?
No.
Well, thank you, Sergeant. That is my evidence, my lord.
I call Joseph Molloy.
What
religion, are you?
C.B.
Take the book in your right hand, read the words on the card.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
What is your full name?
Joseph James Molloy.
And your address, Mr. Molloy?
42B, Antigua Gardens, London, North 4.
And what is your profession?
I'm an actor.
Would you expand a little on that? Well, nothing elaborate, just a brief resume of your career.
Well, I suppose I'm fairly representative. I've had an equity card for over 25 years. I did a long stint in rep without ever earning enough to pay a decent rent.
Yes, just a minute, Mr. Molloy.
If you're being solicitous, Mr. Lowry, I'm quite sure that the members of the jury and myself have understood everything that's been said so far. Equity is the performers' trade union, and rep is the repertory theatre.
My apologies, my lord.
Oh, no apologies necessary, Mr. Lowry. Just so happens that I'm quite well acquainted with theatrical jargon.
My lord. Do please go on, Mr. Molloy.
Yes, sir. Well, I suppose I was like everyone else. I thought that television was going to be the answer to all our prayers, but, well, things didn't get any better. In fact, they got rather worse. Theatres were closing all over the place.
I take it you did other jobs throughout the years. Obviously, you couldn't exist on what you earned as an actor.
That's right. I did a variety of jobs, but it's very difficult for an actor. He has to take the sort of job which he can get out of at short notice. And one thing I would not do was miss the opportunity of playing a part, however small.
Yes, I see. Now, Mr. Molloy, where were you on the evening of April the 18th this year?
I was at home in Finsbury Park.
You're sure of that?
Yes.
How can you be so sure?
Well, it had been an unusual day. I'd met my brother and his wife at London Airport. They'd flown in from Australia that morning.
Were they staying with you?
No, I don't have enough room for visitors. No, they stayed at a hotel.
And you met them on April the 18th?
Yes.
In the evening?
No, it was midday. But that's how I fixed the day. I went straight home, and I spent the entire evening there. In fact, all through the weekend.
You didn't see your brother and his wife later that day?
No.
Was anyone with you that evening?
Yes, a friend of mine, Miss Strauss, Miss Marianne Strauss.
And she was there all evening?
Yes, and all the weekend. She lives there, in the same flat.
You share the accommodation?
Yes, that's never been unusual for actors, but of course nowadays, with rents as they are, everyone...
Yes, it's a very sensible arrangement. Now then, can you by any chance recall how you spent that evening?
Yes, I think I can. Miss Strauss is in the theatre too. She's an actress, and she'd been getting no more work than I had. Well, it wasn't just the acting profession. Any job was hard to come by. Anyway, we'd been racking our brains, trying to think of some way of making a bit of money. And it wasn't just us. All our acting friends were in the same boat. And Miss Strauss came up with this idea of an escort agency. They're very popular these days, and, well, we've got a number of friends who know how to dress decently and how to behave
Yes, it
themselves.
seemed like a good idea at the time.
Oh, it still does. We haven't given up the idea, I can assure you.
Oh, I see. Now, Mr. Molloy, have you ever been to Brompton Abbot?
No.
Do you know where it is?
Yes, I think so. It's about 15 miles outside Fulchester on the Birkenhead Road.
Yes, that's quite correct. But you've never been there?
No.
Mr. Molloy, have you any idea why Mrs. Farrington should pick you out of an identity parade as the man who visited her on the evening of April the 18th?
I have no idea at all.
And so you were, to say the least, very surprised when she did pick you up.
I was absolutely amazed.
Yes. Now, Mr. Molloy, how would you describe Mr. Randell, the television producer?
Describe him?
In a business sense.
Well, he was very efficient. It was a very well-run program. You always got your call in plenty of time. They told you exactly what you had to do.
Like that on every show?
Well, by and large, yes, Your Honour. But, well, some of them can be a bit of a shambles.
And you would ascribe this organisational efficiency to the producer?
No, not just the producer, but if he was bad, I think it would show.
And how would you describe him with regard to yourself? I mean, was he fair-minded, prejudiced, approachable, aloof?
It's difficult to say. I don't know how much influence he had on the casting. Casting of small parts, anyway.
Oh, really? Well, who would offer you the job, then?
Oh, the directors, or the casting department. No, I don't think he was prejudiced, and there's always a certain amount of canteen gossip if a producer has got his favourites.
Yes, but how would you describe him as approachable or aloof in that respect?
Well, he certainly wasn't aloof as far as I was concerned. See, you have to be a bit cagey. One doesn't like to make a direct approach to producers. Some of them go right off you if you do. But, well, it should be February this year. I rang up his office, and he answered straight away. And I said that I was in the studio all that day, and I'd appreciate 10 minutes of his time. And he said yes straight away. And I saw him at 6 o'clock that evening.
Good. Now, I don't want to go into that meeting too deeply at this point, Mr. Molloy, but you might just answer me one question. When you met Mr. Randell, did he make an impression on you?
Yes, he did.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Molloy, when you entered the acting profession, did you do so under your own name, Joseph Molloy?
No. No, I wish I had done now, but I was young at the time. No, I used the name of Edmund Greer. Edmund Greer. And you've used that name ever since? Until a few months ago, yes. Tell us what happened a few months ago. Well, I thought it was time I had a change. I've been switching to character parts and trying to get a quarter page in Spotlight. That's the sort of directory of actors and actresses. So I thought I'd change my name at the same time. Thought it would change my luck. And so what did you do? Well, I wrote to Equity, and I told them, and they said that that was quite all right, so long as the name didn't appear on the Equity register. And that name, Mr. Molloy, the name you chose? Robert Randell.
The jury is composed of members of the general public. The case of the Queen against Molloy will be concluded tomorrow in the Crown Court. Joseph Molloy, an actor, is facing two charges, one of obtaining and the other of attempting to obtain money by deception. It's alleged that he represented himself as Robert Randell, a television producer. It's been suggested to and denied by Mr. Randell that he passed on a description of the accused, alleged to have been given to him by Mrs. Bedelia Conroy, the second victim, to Mrs. Joyce Farrington, the first victim, in order that she might identify Molloy and so bring the case to court, a course of events attractive to Mr. Randell for the publicity which would accrue to his programme. Molloy claims he has an alibi for the time of the first offence and has just informed his counsel that a few months ago he wrote to Equity, the Actors' Trade Union, and informed them he was changing his name to Robert Randell.
And you were allowed to do this?
No problem at all. Equity checked, and they told me it was in order for me to use the name.
And you used it from that point?
Well, in a way, yes. I tried to get accustomed to the idea by introducing myself to people as Robert Randell. I hadn't written any official letters, so using the name I had no call to, except, of course, the letters to Equity and Spotlight.
And why did you choose this particular name, Mr. Molloy?
Well, as I said before, Mr. Randell had made an impression upon me. Struck me as being a good name.
So you could say that it was almost as a compliment to Mr. Randell that you chose to assume his name?
Well, yes, not just as a compliment. It was a good name in show business. I worked it out this way, that if that name was under my picture in Spotlight, it might make the odd casting director stop and wonder if it was Robert Randell, the producer. They soon find out that it wasn't, but anything that makes them stop is a good thing.
Yes, I see. Now, Mr. Molloy, you're here to answer two charges. The first alleges that on the 19th of April last, you dishonestly obtained from Mrs. Joyce Farrington £40 in cash. It is alleged that this offence took place at the church in Brompton Abbot, and that it arose from a meeting with Mrs. Farrington on Friday, the 18th of April, the previous day. Now, where were you on Friday and Saturday, the 18th and 19th of April, Mr. Molloy?
I was at home in Finsbury Park.
Were you alone?
No, I was with a friend.
Marianne Strauss?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, let us turn to the second allegation.
That Joseph Molloy, on the 16th day of May, 1975, attempted dishonestly to obtain from Mrs. Bedelia Conroy £30 in cash with the intention of permanently depriving Mrs. Bedelia Conroy of the said cash by deception, mainly by false representations that he, the said Joseph Molloy, was one Robert Randell, that he was employed in television, that he was a producer of a television serial known as Union Square. Now, we'll take the points one by one. You said that you were Robert Randell. True or false?
True.
Why?
Because I'd assumed the name for professional purposes.
Quite. Now, you said that you were employed in television. True or false?
True, I was employed in television.
Indeed. You said that you were the producer of a serial known as Union Square. True or false?
No, I never said anything of the sort.
What did you say to her that night?
Well, after we'd chatted for a while and I'd bought a drink, I asked Mrs.
Conroy.
Mrs. Conroy, I asked if she'd cash me a cheque. And she said she didn't normally. Oh, wait a minute. She asked me my name. She said, I don't normally, Mr. And I said, Randell, Robert Randell. And if it helps, I'm in television, though that doesn't cut much ice these days.
Yes, the lady remembered the joke.
I didn't mean it as a joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. And that was as far as it went?
Yes.
You said nothing about being a producer or having any association with Union Square?
Nothing, no. She said, would I wait while she went and asked? And I did, and she went. And the next thing I knew, I had a policeman either side of me.
And you uttered not one word, nor took any action in any way intended as a deception?
No, sir, I did not.
Thank you. Now, let's go back to your meeting with Mr. Randell, Mr. Molloy. Now, you've told us that you rang for an interview one day in February last. You spoke to Mr. Randell, and he agreed to see you at 6 o'clock that evening.
Yes, I went up to his office at 6 o'clock, and there was no one in the outer office, so I knocked on the door, and he said, come in, and I went in. And I was there, I suppose, about a quarter of an hour.
Yeah, and why did you ask for this interview in the first place?
Well, it was to follow up a line that I'd been given in the last show. It wasn't very much, but so often I've seen people taken on as regulars who've started in this way with just one line. You can make quite an impression with one line, and, well, I wanted to see if I had.
I see. And do you have any idea why Mr. Randell should deny that this meeting ever took place?
No idea whatsoever.
The meeting ended quite amicably, then?
Yes. Yes, before I went, I asked if he had a group photograph of the cast that he could let me have. And he said so straight away, and he opened the drawer and he gave me one.
I see. May the witness be shown Exhibit 1, please?
Yes.
Is that the photograph, Mr. Molloy?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, tell me, why did you ask for it?
Oh, it's just a stupid hobby of mine. I like to collect these show business photographs, and it amuses people coming to the flat.
Yes, it's an innocent hobby, Mr. Molloy. Are all your activities as innocent?
Yes.
Would you describe yourself as an honest man, Mr. Molloy?
Well, yes, I would.
And you are innocent of the charges laid against you?
Yes, sir. I am, totally.
Thank you, Mr. Molloy.
Now, Mr. Molloy, you're telling the court that you were not in Brompton Abbot on Friday, the 18th of April, that you did not meet and subsequently sleep with Mrs. Joyce Farrington of the Church Inn in that village, that you did not take £40 in cash from Mrs. Farrington, and you did not, throughout, pass yourself off as Robert Randell, the television producer.
Yes, that is true.
You were at home in London, all the time, with a friend.
Yes.
Yes. How good a friend is Miss Strauss?
Well, we've known each other for over 10 years.
Known each other? Well, very well, intimately?
Well, we've lived together for a good long time. There's bound to be a certain amount of intimacy.
Yes, indeed there is. Bound to be a degree of loyalty, too.
Yeah.
And you were with Miss Strauss the entire time?
Yes.
Now, tell me, Mr. Molloy, do you and Miss Strauss, how shall I put it, go Dutch? Share expenses as far as the flat is concerned?
Yes, more often than not.
More often than not. The trouble is that Miss Strauss has had no full-time employment for the past 2 years, has she? She's been drawing Social Security.
I don't know when she had her last part.
So how do you go Dutch, Mr. Molloy? You provide the money and she provides other little services like alibis? You had plenty of time to think up this little charade, hadn't you?
I don't know what you mean.
Well, released on bail, straight to the loyal Miss Strauss, and a nice little story cooked up long before you had to give notice of the alibi. What was it you told my learned friend? You and she had been racking your brains trying to think up some way you could make a bit of money. And you came up with one, didn't you? £40 from Mrs. Farrington and almost another 30 from Mrs. Conroy.
I wasn't there.
You weren't where, Mr. Molloy?
At Mrs. Farrington's.
Oh, we know. We have your word for it. We know. And no doubt we shall also have the totally unprejudiced word of a lady who has lived with you for several years and for whom you provide. Yes, we know. But you were at Mrs. Conroy's hotel, weren't you? Or are Mrs. Conroy and the police as wrong as Mrs. Farrington was in identifying you? But let's progress. Let's move on to Mrs. Conroy's. In fact, there wasn't enough money in your account to meet that cheque if she'd accepted it, was there?
I'd been expecting some money to be paid into my account.
Oh, were you? What money was that?
Well, I'd done some voiceovers for a couple of commercials and, a few months previously, and I was on repeat fees, and normally they would have been repeated.
But as it so happened, these weren't.
As it so happened, they weren't.
How disappointing for you. And at a time like that. What were you doing in Fulchester, Mr. Molloy?
I was looking the place over as a centre for the escort agency. London rents are a bit high, to say the least.
And as you say, there wasn't much money about.
No.
Why did you choose the name Randell, Mr. Molloy?
I've already explained why.
I know, I heard you. And I was hoping you might depart from your usual practice and tell the truth for once. Shall I tell you what the truth is, Mr. Molloy? You chose Randell as an insurance policy. You said to yourself, or perhaps Miss Strauss, supposing I'm caught, what a marvellous thing it would be if I could say that I was known as Robert Randell. That would really throw them, wouldn't it? Then, in spite of Mrs. Farrington's identification, in spite of my alibi resting on the word of a lifelong friend, and the cheque that would have bounced sky high, and the photograph of the cast of Union Square ready at hand as a further proof of my false identity.
I was given that photograph.
Were you? Step by step, Mr. Molloy. You went up to Mr. Randell's office one evening at 6 o'clock. There was no one in the outer office. You knocked on Mr. Randell's door. Surprise, surprise, there was no answer. So you walked in, you picked up that photograph, and you walked out. And what was it doing in your briefcase?
Mr. Randell gave it me.
In February. It was still in your briefcase in mid-May. A photograph that you'd have us believe was intended for the wall of your flat to impress your visitors.
I was waiting to have it framed.
Oh, you were waiting to have it framed. I can see no reason whatsoever in wasting any more of this court's time.
Mr. Molloy, I won't keep you long. Tell me, how would you describe your financial position over the last 10 years?
Unsound.
Unsound. But you've managed to pay your way in the end. You have no debts, you have no angry creditors searching for you.
Well, if I have, they've had every chance to find me. I've been at the same address for 6 years.
Thank you, Mr. Molloy. Does your lordship have any further questions?
Mr. Molloy, do you deny that you offered a cheque to Mrs. Conroy?
No, my lord.
And that would be for £30?
Yes, my lord.
Now, could you have backed this cheque up with a banker's card?
No, I've never had one, my lord.
Oh, from choice?
Yes, it might have been just a little bit too tempting.
Yes, I see. Thank you. You may go back to the dock.
Thank you, my lord.
I call Marianne Strauss. What is your name and address, please?
Marianne Strauss, 42B, Antigua Gardens, London, North 4.
And you live with the accused, Joseph Molloy.
Yes.
Would you tell my lord and members of the jury where you were on the evening of April the 18th last and the following morning?
I was at home.
Were you alone?
No, I was with Joseph, Mr. Molloy.
The entire evening, night and morning?
Yes.
Could you give us a brief resume of how you spent the time?
Oh, eating, talking, arguing, going to the loo. The banal things that one does when one doesn't expect to be called to account several months later. We probably even watched some television.
Yes, I sympathize, Miss Strauss. Obviously, that period of time didn't imprint itself on your memory.
Well, I certainly didn't have it ringed in red as a day I'd have to provide an alibi for Joseph. He'd been to collect his brother and sister-in-law from Heathrow that morning, but that had nothing to do with me.
Now, are you aware that Mr. Molloy, the accused, gave notice of alibi for the period in question and made a declaration that you were with him at that time?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And you are saying that this is a true declaration?
Well, I certainly had that impression. And before you remind me, I do realize I'm under oath. So if the question is, was Joseph Molloy the accused with me on the evening, night and morning of April the 18th and 19th of this year, the answer is yes.
Thank you, Miss Strauss. Now, Miss Strauss, did you telephone Mr. Molloy at the Feathers Hotel, Fulchester, on the evening of May the 16th last?
Yes, I did.
Why, Miss Strauss?
Because I wanted to give him a message. What was the message? I'll tell you. I'd seen in the current edition of Television Today, or the stage, if you prefer it, that the BBC were planning a new classical series. Joseph has the kind of bearing that suits the classics, and the producer was an old rep buddy, so I thought he ought to follow it up, but fast. So I phoned to tell him.
I see. But you didn't, in fact, speak to him?
No, the stupid woman mumbled something about him not being there and left me holding the phone, so I rang off.
Now, why did you ring the Feathers?
Because I thought that's where he would be. Well, he'd say he might stay the night, and he picked that one out of the AA book, so rather cleverly, I thought that was where I phoned.
Thank you, Miss Strauss.
I see you wear a wedding ring, Miss Strauss.
Yes, I do. And not for the benefit of hotel receptionists. I married Mr. Molloy in 1968.
You married Mr. Molloy?
Why? Is it against the law?
Are you telling this court that you are married to the accused?
Oh, most certainly I'm not. You asked me about the wedding ring, and I told you I married Joseph in 1968. Had you allowed me to finish, I would have told you that I divorced him in 1971. Not that we didn't get on. The reason we divorced, although we kept it from the divorce court, was incompatibility with the Inland Revenue. The government, in its wisdom, had made it more financially attractive to live in sin. Not that there was very much sin, but at least we were a pound or two better off.
Miss Strauss, this is not a theatrical performance. We are interested in the simple truth without any staging.
I was answering the questions, my lord.
You are an intelligent young woman, Miss Strauss. You know exactly what I mean. Please do as you're told.
Miss Strauss, you told my learned friend that you rang Mr. Molloy at the Feathers Hotel in Fulchester on May the 16th to tell him about something you'd read in the stage, or Television Today, was it?
Yes.
Not to warn him about something you'd read in the Morning Advertiser, a little piece about Robert Randell, how someone had been impersonating him, together with a photograph of the real Robert Randell. Because, you see, one of the little surprises that you've so far kept from us, Miss Strauss, is that you work in a London public house on Friday and Saturday nights. So it would have been perfectly possible for you to have picked up a copy of the previous day's Morning Advertiser, wouldn't it?
Is that the question? Sorry, I'm rather lost.
Yes, that is the question.
Well, in that case, yes, it would have been perfectly possible for me to have seen the previous day's edition of the Morning Advertiser, but I didn't. I rang Joseph to tell him about the serial.
His lordship, as ever, was right. You do have a gift for the theatrical. I can't understand why you don't get more work. You seem a very good actress.
I am a very good actress. Unfortunately, as you may have noticed, I have a habit of speaking my mind. I tell directors when I don't like their shots, and I tell writers when I don't like their scripts. The fact that I'm right more often than not cuts very little ice. I suppose I'm unemployable.
At least you have no illusions.
I never have had.
Never? Or hardly ever? The odd one, perhaps, like this alibi.
He was with me.
You know, Miss Strauss, one of the things that worried me during my cross-examination of Mr. Molloy was that he didn't seem devious enough to have thought up this little scheme. And parts of it were very devious indeed. The change of name to Randell, an astute stroke, which I couldn't quite attribute to the accused. But now my worries are over. I've met you, and I realize that all those hours of unemployment were very far from wasted. Were you the brains behind this organization, Miss Strauss? Did you think up this little scheme, send Mr. Molloy on his merry way with full instructions, invent his alibi, whilst he prepared for a night's dalliance with another lady. Was that part of the deal, Miss Strauss? Or was he supposed to behave himself? Or was he?
The question's unanswerable. Joseph wasn't there.
Yes, it must have been a considerable shock to you to realize that Mr. Molloy had so far exceeded his terms of reference. But you've been lying to us, have you not, Miss Strauss? He was not with you. He was in Brompton Abbot, carrying out your little scheme. And when on his next little criminal venture, you rang him in Fulchester, it was not to tell him about a BBC serial. It was to warn him of what you'd read in the Morning Advertiser, to tell him to get out. And if you'd been half an hour earlier, that's exactly what he would have done, and none of us would have been here today.
I told the truth.
Would you consider yourself a loyal person, Miss Strauss?
Yes, and honest.
Honest, meaning truthful. You know, I wonder, Miss Strauss, if in every sense of the word, you're not just a little bit too good to be true.
Miss Strauss, when were you working in the public house that Friday, May the 16th?
I worked through the lunchtime session. I went back about 9 o'clock that night.
I see. So you made the telephone call to Fulchester from your own home?
Yes.
What, at about 7:45?
Something like that.
So if, as my learned friend alleges, you had seen the copy of the previous day's Morning Advertiser, you could only have seen it the previous day or during that Friday lunchtime.
Well, all this is purely hypothetical, but for the sake of peace, yes.
Yes. And yet you made no attempt to contact Mr. Molloy until 7:45 on Friday evening.
No.
Quite. Now, Miss Strauss, my learned friend has suggested that you planned this series of crimes and sent Mr. Molloy to execute them. Is it not correct that Mr. Molloy has suffered 2 serious heart attacks in the past 4 years?
Yes.
And that another attack might be fatal?
Yes.
So that an enterprise of this kind would involve a very serious risk to his health. Do you love Mr. Molloy, Miss Strauss?
Yes. In my way, I love him.
Thank you, Miss Strauss. Another?
You may leave the witness box, Miss Strauss.
That is my case, my lord.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have listened most attentively to the evidence in this case. It is now for you to decide, upon that evidence, the innocence or the guilt of the accused, Joseph Molloy. Now you will make up your minds as to the weight of the evidence given by Joyce Farrington. Was there a sound reason, you may ask, why she should give a description of her deceiver to the police which did not accord with the physical attributes of the accused whom she later identified? You will consider the evidence of Bedelia Conroy. Now, could that all-important corollary to the accused's self-introduction, "I am the producer of Union Square," could that have been the result of autosuggestion, or did she really hear those words spoken? Above all, when considering the prosecution, you will ask yourselves if Robert Randell, the producer, was capable of entering into a conspiracy with Mrs. Farrington to the detriment of the accused. The defense would have you believe that at the time of the first offense, the accused was in London with Marianne Strauss. Now, you should not place too much importance on the relationship between Strauss and Molloy, except insofar as that concerns the genuineness of that alibi. If you believe that that alibi is sound, then you must find the accused not guilty of the first charge. As far as the second charge is concerned, you will consider the evidence of the accused as to how he came to be in Fulchester that evening, and why he considered himself to be qualified to use the name Robert Randell. You will at the same time remember that the accused asked Mrs. Conroy if she would cash him a cheque. Now, was this, you may ask, a simple request such as is made many times during the course of normal relationships every day, Or was it a step in the commission of a crime? If, having considered these matters, it is your belief that the prosecution has proved beyond reasonable doubt that the accused committed either or both of the offences, then you must find him guilty on either or both of the charges. Will you now retire and consider your verdicts?
Will the foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict on the first count on which you are all agreed?
We have.
On the first count, you find the defendant, Joseph Molloy, guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
On the second count, you find the defendant, Joseph Molloy, guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Joseph Molloy was found guilty of attempting to obtain money by deception and was fined £100.